Greetings and welcome to another episode of Association Matters, the official podcast of PCAAE for conversations on governance, leadership, and impact. We believe that when associations thrive, societies rise. So, we're your host. I'm Bobby.
And I'm Emily. And for the topic of today's podcast, it's building high performance association boards. In today's episode, we'll focus on this topic, and it sits at the heart of every association. As associations navigate increasing complexity and rising member expectations, boards are being called to become more strategic, more focused, and more effective in their governance roles.
So, joining us today is Francis Child, CEO of the Association Specialist, who will share his perspective on where governance can improve, how boards can better balance strategy and operations, and what a strong and productive CEO-board relationship looks like in practice.
Francis is a UK qualified chartered accountant who migrated to Australia in 1992 following a successful corporate career in the music industry. In 2000, Francis purchased Conference Action, an established PCO, and in 2005 he acquired a small local association management company, the Australian Professional Centre. He renamed that entity as the Association Specialists and has now seen that grow to the largest association management company in Australia, supporting over 70 associations and having them benefit from the services TAS provides.
Impressive bio, Francis. So welcome again to Association Matters. We're delighted to have you with us. So let's start our conversation. When you look at association boards today, where do you see the biggest opportunities for governance to improve, and what's typically behind that?
I think my view on that would be that associations of the past, and I'm talking some time ago now, probably treated the association and the members more as a hobby, as a board at board level, rather than as a professional operation. As such, I think that boards now have to really start thinking about the organisation they're looking after as a business and acting in a far more corporate style. It may sound tedious and boring, but I think it's what's required to really develop associations in the future. And the other thing I think that's really important is that it boils down to, I think associations in today's world are going to be seen as needing to be credible, and they're going to be seen as the source of truth. And if they're going to do that, they have to be respected, they've got to build a brand, they've got to be knowledgeable, and they've got to deal with everything with integrity. They can't afford, politics in the boardroom and items of that nature. So it needs to be professionally run. It needs to be thought of as a business. I've seen many associations that still don't even manage a budget at the moment, which I find just staggering. So if you're putting together a strategic plan or something like that and you haven't even got to budget stage, then you've got some problems. Oh, well, I mean, I suppose the topic then generated is how you improve that and get to that level of professionalism in the boardroom. And I think the first thing is education, which I think has been lacking. People who've generally been on boards have been selected from within their industry, which again may not have a business background, doctors or mechanics or whatever it might be. And they may not have that level of expertise to actually run a business necessarily. So I think it's important to get that education, which can be done. There's two elements to it. I see a lot of education focused purely on governance. So there are organisations that, such as the Australian Institute of Company Directors, who focus very heavily on that governance element. But I think the education needs to be broader than that these days. It needs to cover financial accounts. It needs to cover marketing. It needs to cover IT knowledge. And so boards need to think much more strategically in terms of the education that their team needs, or seek to get that expertise on their board in some form or other. Because in order to, you don't run a corporate board without an accountant and without a company secretary and without a lawyer probably and without a marketing specialist and sales. Associations need to start thinking in the same way. That's my thinking on that. key to that is probably, a good induction process as well when people come onto the board, proper mentoring from people who've been on the board and know what's going on in the organisation, and making sure that the new board member understands, the challenges, the strategies, the purpose of the organisation and the value proposition that they're trying to provide to their members. And ultimately, leadership's a major factor in this. Having good leaders at the top of your association, similar to a good CEO in a corporate, somebody who's decisive. I heard a good quote the other day actually about leadership, that if you don't make decisions, you can't be a leader. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And it's also important for the association to be at the head table. I don't know whether that sort of covers a few of the things. I've got some other thoughts on it, but I don't know whether anyone had any questions or thoughts there.
Wow, that's quite the list.
Look, as I mentioned, expertise is important. If you don't have it in the board, then bring it in. Get a financial expert, get a marketing expert, get an IT expert. At the end of the day, the associations today are talking credibility, need to have a focus that they need to be at the head table. They need to be able to talk to the stakeholders and members and engage at the right level. They've got to be seen. They need to get out there and talk to the members on a regular basis. I was dealing with one association the other day who now have a sort of meet the president session when they want to go around the country, have sort of town hall workshops and things where they just get to talk to the president and hear about the strategy that the board has. And ultimately, there needs to be accountability and responsibility. Unless the board members are held accountable and reviewed on their performance, it's no longer the case that non-participation is an option on a board, in my opinion. Then board members need to be held accountable and responsible for the elements that they've chosen to look after or to be involved with.
I definitely agree, Francis. I do feel like there is that shift from it being a bit of a hobby, a bit of just being invited maybe to almost fill a seat, to that shift to that corporate requirement, that more structured requirement, needing certain expertise within the board to take the associations to that next level. There's always a balance between being strategic and then being pulled into operations. Can be a tricky one. How should boards think about where that line sits between the two?
Look, it's often very difficult, and particularly where you've got smaller associations who may not have the scale or the resources to have that split. And so effectively you end up with board members and volunteers carrying out a lot of the jobs that theoretically they shouldn't be doing, because they should be acting strategically and not acting from a management perspective. So it does depend a little bit on the scale, but breaking that up, I think, is possible when you have a board which you literally have a strategy meeting, and then you have a board or committee who operate on the operational side, so that you do actually break those two segments up. If you've got staff, it's obviously much easier because ultimately they are, basically there to deliver on the goals that have been set by the board and on the strategy. And therefore, it really becomes about getting the structure right and getting the reporting methodology right, so the board are being kept informed of how the performance is going against their strategic goals that they've set.
So, I agree with you, Francis, that it depends really on whether you're a large organization or a small organization, because there could be an issue perhaps of, let's say, micromanagement in some cases, right? So that's also some issues especially for small, not so many staff associations. But so in relation to this, and our third and final question for you is, for CEOs working with their boards, what does a really effective board relationship look like in practice? And how do you build one?
Look, at the end of the day, the successful relationship between that board and the CEO boils down ultimately to trust and mutual respect. And if you don't have those, it won't work. So there need to be very clearly defined responsibilities in that area, as you say, probably you don't want to be ending up micromanaging a CEO. The CEO has to have the tools to work with. So ultimately, I say it needs to be target driven. So the board should be setting the targets and goals for the CEO to achieve on a regular basis. It needs to be resource led. You can't ask a CEO to do everything if you don't give them the resources to do everything.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
they need to have the support. You can't expect something for nothing. And then ultimately they have to be measured against the outputs that you've set and those achievements. So, I mean, just having tools in place such as your financial budget, such as your 3 or 5 year plan, if that's the way you want to operate, using those as the benchmarks. But ultimately, the CEO has to come to the meetings or report to the board with total integrity and believe that that the board will listen in an open and transparent manner. And you've just got to have that clear trust between the two elements of the workings of the organisation. And again, very similar to what I said at the beginning, a corporate structure where you have a CEO and a board and reporting to each other on a regular basis. But they have to have mutual respect and trust.
Francis, can you share maybe some success stories where you've seen a board move from sort of maybe a more volunteer-led to that more leveled up approach, a bit more corporate, getting maybe that shift happening?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of use names particularly.
Yeah, without names.
There's one organisation that always leaps to mind that we've worked with for many years. And to be honest, leadership has been extremely important in that organisation. They've been very fortunate to have some very senior leaders from within the industry who've stepped up and probably gone above and beyond. They've taken time, as I said right at the beginning, to educate their boards and to mentor them coming on. So, for instance, they have a specific position on the board for a young person who they bring on and mentor to hopefully bring them through the business. And that person's typically targeted who they think is a standout in the industry and would bring strong benefits to the organisation. They've grown as well from using us purely as an association management backup. Then they put a CEO on and grew their membership gradually through reputation as much as anything, but also delivering very, very heavily at the head table. So they're consulted all the time when it comes to the sector they're in, which is in the financial services. They are consulted by government on change now all the time in their sector and seen as the brand, I suppose, that can be trusted. And then from there, they've now started to take on their own specialists internally in terms of they've now got a marketing person, they've now got a sponsorship selling person. They haven't done it overnight. It's been a gradual plan over time. But what I think they've always done all the way through is they've kept the members informed and engaged and really delivered for them. And it boils down at the end of the day to the value proposition, that if the members don't see the value proposition, they're not going to stay. So a lot of good communication, a lot of trust, and also a little bit of fun. They have some golf days and things, and and they still keep some networking going. So they know how important that is. At the end of the day, I always say there's 4 reasons that you have an association, or it's about credibility. It's about being able to get information. It's about networks, and it's about the power of the pack. And really, you need to be in one or all of those to be successful at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I totally agree. You've got to have some fun in there as well between all the serious business. Well, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us today, Francis. As always, for our podcast viewers, we wrap up the session with 3 key takeaways. There was a lot in there, so I'll try my best here. Number 1, I think, was if associations want to stay relevant, it's very important for their boards to make that shift to a more corporate format, to become a visible, credible source of truth. As we heard, this doesn't happen by accident. It can be built through strong education, clear leadership, and I really like that quote you said about making decisions and being able to make decisions. You can't be a leader without that. It's about leading with that real expertise and being seen, not just operating in the background. Number 2 is the line between governance and operations works well when it's clearly designed. This can be a little bit more challenging for those smaller teams, but boards should set that direction and strategy, and teams should deliver the outcomes. And the bridge between the two seems to be that structure and maybe some reporting. Without that clarity, things, I can imagine, can get blurry quite quickly. And takeaway number 3 is, at the end of the day, the CEO and board relationship lives or dies on trust and respect, which you really highlighted there. When that's in place and you pair that with maybe some targets and, very important, the right resources and measurable outcomes, and that keeps that responsibility happening, that's when performance will really start to follow.
Excellent summation again, Emily. So again, thank you, Francis, for sharing your insights with us. And to the audience, thank you for joining Association Matters, where governance, leadership, and impact come together, because we believe that when associations thrive, societies rise. This podcast is brought to you by the Philippine Council of Associations and Association Executives, members, AMS, and Pricing for Associations.
Subscribe to our next podcast and visit the PCAAE website for updates and full episode notes. Until next time.
Thank you, Francis.